Hi and welcome to Razz Reviews. Today I'm going to be reviewing Dr. Sleep. Dr. Sleep is directed by Mike Flanagan and it's starring Ewan McGregor. And it's basically the sequel of The Shining, and it's also an adaptation of the sequel book by Stephen King called also Dr. Sleep. And the story is set more than 30 years after the events of The Shining, and it follows an adult Danny who's dealing with the psychological and physical problems that he's having as a result of all the torture he has endured in the Overlook Hotel. His situation gets more complicated when he meets another gifted child who has the same power as him, and she's being chased by evil people who want to capture people who have the shining in them and basically do bad and mean stuff to them. And that's all I'm gonna say without spoiling. Now, from the get-go, this movie has a massive hurdle in front of it. Number one, it has to give a satisfying sequel to The Shining and satisfy the fans of The Shining by Stanley Kubrick. And it also has to give a good adaptation of the book by Stephen King, satisfying Stephen King himself and his fans and fans of the book. And I believe that this film navigated those challenges pretty well. I found it to be a very nice film. I haven't read Dr. Sleep myself, but I worship at the altar of Stephen King and also worship at the altar of Stanley Kubrick. So I'm a fan of both people, and I like this film because it really does combine elements from both artists, and I thought it did it very, very well. As a sequel to The Shining, is it better than The Shining? It could never be, or at least that's what I thought. I went to this film with very low expectations, not thinking that it could possibly match up to the genius work of Stanley Kubrick. I mean, he is like the biggest legend in cinema, and not a lot of people can even come close to the art he does. However, I do think it is a satisfying sequel to The Shining because it follows through on Danny's story, and I think the treatment of his character is very well due to the very nice writing of his character story. I really like what they did with his character. I really like his character arc in the film, and I really like what they did with his power and how he treats it as an adult. I'm not gonna spoil what he does, but it's pretty cool. This movie diverts from the horrorness of The Shining and stays a little bit more true to the fantasy element in Stephen King's novel. And we see that play out a lot. There's a lot of fantasy here and a lot of world building, and it's not necessarily a scary film. Do not expect going into this film and getting scared. It's not horrifying. It is uncomfortable. There is some horror elements and there is some suspense, but also there's a lot of drama and there's a lot of fantasy. And me being a fan of all that stuff, I found it extremely enjoyable. I liked the world, I really liked the villains, and I liked the events of the film. And I liked the introduction of all the new characters. The kid in the movie played by, what's her name? Kyliegh Curran. I think. She is fantastic in the movie. She gives a beautiful performance. Her chemistry with Ewan McGregor is amazing. They are the heart of the film, and I really love their relationships, and they both gave fantastic performances here. The first act of this film is pretty slow, and we spend a very long time in each of the characters' lives in order to get to know them better, and that includes Ewan McGregor's character Danny, the little girl, and even the villain. We know them a lot by the time things hit the fan. We know these people very well, we're connected with them, and we understand them, and that kept me really involved in the second half of the film, and I thought that was pretty cool, and that's really a Mike Flanagan kind of thing. I mean, he wrote this film, the pacing is really nice, but he also spends a lot of time, always, on the characters of his horror stories and the impact of the horror on them, not just the experience, and it always makes his films a little bit more emotional and a little bit deeper than your run-of-the-mill horror story. He did that in The Haunting of Hill House, and he definitely did that here, and it worked very well. I really liked it. Visually, the movie is actually pretty beautiful. I really like the cinematography, and I especially like the transitions between different shots. There's a lot of cool creative transitions that are really pleasing to the eye and also give you the sense of otherworldliness that is a theme that runs throughout this movie. However, this is never ever going to match up to the visuals of The Shining, because just those are iconic and beautiful, and again, it's Stanley Kubrick. Yeah. But that doesn't take away from the fact that this film actually did look very nice, and I really like the visual treatment of it. Now, as much as I want to pretend that I don't care about fan service and I want to be above it, I gotta admit, in the moments when we hear the Shining music, I did lose my mind just a little bit because it's like, oh my God, goosebumps. For me, Dr. Sleep works very, very well until the third act happens. The third act is actually the weakest point in the film and the weakest part, and it left me a little bit unsatisfied as I left the movie. But then the more I thought about the entire experience, I appreciated the things that worked really well. But towards the end, there are certain story elements that don't work very well. And also, the movie does get lost in between trying to be itself and be an homage to The Shining. There are certain points where it felt like the movie was putting its ass between two chairs, and it gave it a bit of an identity crisis sometimes. And that was very present towards the end, because towards the end of the film, it really did turn into sort of a fan servicey thing where it's like, oh, remember this and remember that and remember this from The Shining, oh, remember this. And it turned into like a member berry situation. So I didn't enjoy that as much. I actually really liked this film when it was trying to be its own thing. That's when it worked best. The characters were really well set up and the character arc is very compelling. The story was really good. Stepping away from that in order to connect so much with The Shining, I felt sometimes it worked. It's not always bad. It's not like, oh my God, it's fan service, skip it. No, it's not just fan service at all. It actually does have really beautiful, meaningful moments in The Shining referential sequences. I'm trying to spoil anything, but there are other moments that don't work. There are things that don't feel earned, like why are they here? Why are they doing this? Things like that sometimes that really took away from the film towards the end. But overall, as an experience, I thought it was a very nice movie, very enjoyable. If you're a fan of The Shining, definitely you should check it out. If you're a fan of the book, Dr. Sleep, you should also check it out. It's a very nice horror fantasy story with a lot of heart, and I enjoyed it very much, and I'm gonna give Dr. Sleep an 8 out of 10. So, have you seen The Shining? Are you a sucker for all the fan service? Are you a giant Stanley Kubrick fanboy, fangirl? Are you a Stephen King fanboy, fangirl? Let me know in the comment section, and as always, like, share, and subscribe, and don't forget to ask me what you'd like me to review for you next. See ya!